Some thinkers whisper to the soul while the world shouts at the mind. Simone Weil was one of them. She didn't seek fame. She didn't build a school. She didn't even want to be remembered. And yet, her words pierce through time with a force that feels divine. Why? Because she understood something most of us run from: suffering. And not just pain, but suffering as a spiritual tool, a gateway, a sacred paradox. Simone Weil lived as if her soul had one foot in this world and one foot in another. Born into privilege in Paris in 1909, she could have become an academic, a comfortable philosopher. But instead, she became a factory worker, a soldier, a mystic, and ultimately, a martyr of empathy. She wasn't content to write about human suffering. She insisted on experiencing it. What kind of mind chooses pain over comfort, obscurity over praise, emptiness over fullness? That's the riddle Simone left us. In a world obsessed with success, she pursued surrender. In an age of noise, she demanded silence. And in a culture of ego, she sought the annihilation of self. She believed that suffering wasn't a detour from grace. It was the doorway. Weil saw affliction not as something to be avoided, but as a kind of divine language, a way God communicates with the soul. Not punishment, not cruelty, but the stripping away of illusion. Affliction, she wrote, is something quite distinct from suffering. It is a laceration of the soul so deep that it can no longer even cry out. Most of us, when faced with pain, look for distraction. We run, we numb, we blame, but Simone, she stared it down. She stepped into the fire with open hands, and what she brought back from that fire wasn't despair, it was clarity. She once wrote, "The soul is not pierced so that it may be wounded. It is pierced so that it may be purified." That's the essence of her spiritual vision. That beneath all pain lies the potential for transformation, if we don't turn away. But don't mistake her for a masochist. Simone didn't worship suffering. She simply recognized it as an unavoidable aspect of human life, and believed that refusing to engage with it truthfully is what truly destroys us. She saw beauty in attention, in presence, in bearing witness to suffering without trying to fix it or flee from it. This was the radical heart of her spirituality: attention. Not action, not control, just attention. She believed that the purest form of love was to pay absolute attention to another being, especially in their pain. No agenda, no superiority, just the silent act of presence. But how did someone with such profound insight end up so forgotten? Part of the answer lies in how deeply she defied categories. She was a Marxist who loved Christ, a philosopher who distrusted academia, a Jew who was drawn to the crucified God. She didn't fit, not in her time, not in ours. And perhaps that's what makes her voice so urgent now. We live in a time of extremes. Suffering is everywhere, and yet we're trained to look away. Or worse, to turn it into content, commentary, consumption. But Simone Weil reminds us, some things are too sacred to be solved. They must be suffered. Not out of despair, but because suffering, when met with attention and love, becomes something else entirely: grace. But grace doesn't come cheaply. It requires the death of the ego, the death of control, the death of all the stories we tell ourselves to avoid pain. And Simone, more than any modern thinker, was willing to die in every one of those ways. Her writing was never academic in tone. It was prophetic. She didn't write to impress. She wrote as someone who had tasted transcendence and returned to tell us how to find it. And she found it not in ecstasy or visions, but in hunger, in labor, in war, in silence, in solitude, in empty churches and crowded factories. Her path was not upward, but downward, into the depths of human experience, where suffering strips us bare, and where, paradoxically, the soul becomes free. She believed that the absence of God, the silence, the abandonment, the void, was not a sign of divine cruelty, but a mirror of the crucifixion itself. That God, too, had known forsakenness. That Christ's cry from the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" was not a theological problem, but the central truth of divine love. Simone understood that we don't need a God who rescues us from suffering. We need a God who enters it with us, who knows it, who speaks the language of the broken heart. That's what made her mysticism so raw, so honest. She didn't preach from above. She whispered from beside us. And in doing so, she offered something the world desperately needs, a vision of spirituality that doesn't escape life, but penetrates it completely. But let's not romanticize her too quickly. Simone Weil was also difficult. She refused easy answers. She rejected dogma. Her theology was unorthodox, her life uncomfortable, her demands on herself extreme. She fasted, she refused medical care, she lived in voluntary poverty. She once said, "It is not up to us to believe in God, but to refuse to believe in anything else." This was not a woman of half measures, and yet, despite her severity, there was a gentleness to her vision, a sense that beneath all our striving, all our wounds, all our noise, there is a still point, a silence, a grace that asks for nothing but our presence. That's why attention for her was prayer. Unmixed attention is prayer, she wrote, because when we give our full awareness to something or someone, we step outside of ourselves. We enter into a kind of communion, and in that moment, the veil lifts. We see clearly, Weil's life was short. She died at 34 during World War II, malnourished and exhausted, exiled from her homeland, still refusing to eat more than what was rationed to her countrymen in France. Was it a form of spiritual protest? A final act of solidarity? Or an unconscious surrender to the suffering she could no longer carry? We'll never know. But what we do know is this: in that short life, she left behind a spiritual map, not one of comfort or success, but one of truth, a path that says, don't run from your pain, turn toward it. Let it break you open, and when it does, when the illusion of the ego shatters, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see, not with your eyes, but with your soul. And what you see is grace. Simone Weil never called herself a saint. She would have rejected the very notion. She didn't want followers. She didn't want fame. She wanted truth. And truth, she believed, was found in attention, in affliction, in love without ego. She wrote, "The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say to him, 'What are you going through?' Not, 'How can I fix you?' Not, 'How do I avoid this?' But, 'What are you going through?' With those 5 words, she cuts through centuries of moral philosophy and lands directly at the heart of what it means to be human. And it's this radical compassion, this refusal to turn away, that made her a mystic. Not because she had visions or ecstasies, but because she learned to see reality in its rawness and still say yes. In a time when so much suffering is either weaponized or ignored, Simone's legacy is more urgent than ever. She reminds us that spiritual awakening isn't found in avoiding suffering. It's found in the way we attend to it, in ourselves, in others, in the world. To truly live a life of meaning, we must stop asking, "How do I escape this?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to teach me?" And here's where it gets deeper. Simone believed that suffering, when endured with attention and love, actually dislodges the false self. It dissolves the illusions we hold on to, that we are in control, that the world owes us something, that ego is our protector. When those illusions die, what's left is not emptiness, but a deeper kind of fullness, a sacred silence, a spaciousness within, a presence that no longer needs to prove or strive. She called this decreation. Not self-destruction, but the act of unmaking oneself so that divine light can enter. It's not about erasing your identity. It's about emptying the ego so that something more honest, more eternal, can flow through you. Think about that. In a world constantly screaming more, Simone chose less. Not out of self-hatred, but out of love for what is real. Her entire spiritual philosophy can be distilled into one paradox. Only when you lose yourself completely can you begin to truly live. And this is where her vision becomes frightening, beautiful, and completely countercultural. She believed that grace does not descend into our lives because we deserve it. It arrives when we stop resisting reality, when we stand still in the fire of suffering, not to be consumed, but to be clarified. And through that fire, we begin to see others not as objects, not as roles, not as extensions of our own story, but as souls, as sacred presences, as equal fragments of the divine. This is why attention for Weil was revolutionary. It was love stripped of sentimentality. It was prayer without words. It was the most radical act of seeing. And how do we practice this in a world as distracted and chaotic as ours? Start small. Listen without interrupting. Sit in silence without reaching for your phone. Notice where your pain lives in your body. Give attention to someone else's story without rushing to insert your own. These are not easy practices. They are profoundly difficult. But Simone Weil didn't offer comfort. She offered clarity. And clarity is far more transformative than comfort ever could be. And here's the hard truth. Most people will never read Simone Weil. Her work is dense, her ideas unsettling, her life uncomfortable. But that's exactly why we must remember her, because she didn't give us spiritual candy. She gave us medicine. Bitter, potent, purifying medicine. She taught us that suffering doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be understood. That grace doesn't descend from the sky. It is born in silence, attention, and surrender. That true mysticism isn't about escaping the world. It's about entering it more deeply than you ever thought possible. She didn't just think differently. She lived differently. And maybe that's the invitation she's still offering us today, not to admire her, not to quote her, but to dare to become like her. To sit with suffering instead of fleeing. To empty ourselves instead of inflating. To pay attention. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. In the end, Simone Weil's legacy isn't just a collection of books or ideas. It's a spiritual mirror. One that asks, what are you running from? And more importantly, what might happen if you stopped running? Maybe that's where grace begins. Not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of attention. In that quiet, almost invisible act of saying, I see you, I hear you, I am with you, so let me ask you this. What does suffering mean to you? Do you avoid it, justify it, transcend it? Or like Simone, do you dare to listen to it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you wrestle with these questions. And if this message resonated with something in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who's been carrying their pain in silence. Because maybe, just maybe, what we all need It is not an escape from our wounds, but the courage to let them teach us. Stay awake. Stay honest. Stay human. And I'll see you in the next video.